Today, we'll be talking about how to create suspense in a scene and how to keep your audience glued to that screen. Today, we'll be discussing the tools of suspense. Please be aware, we'll be using the incredibly entertaining 1994 action movie, Speed, as an example. So, spoilers ahead. In Speed, Officer Jack Traven of the LAPD tries to protect a bus full of innocent people from being the next deadly target of a very dangerous mad bomber. The pacing of this film is intense, and that is due to how the scenes are designed. The scenes in Speed possess three simple but effective elements. Each scene has a setup, a focus, and resistance. Let's delve into each one, starting with setup. Now, in this scene, Jack finally manages to get the bus driver's attention and tells him, "Stay above 50, or the bus will explode," just as the bad bomber had planned. For Jack to better help the people on board, he has to actually get on the bus. Here's where the first aspect of the setup comes in: geography. Geography must be the first aspect established in any scene. If your audience doesn't know where the action is taking place and where your characters are in relation to one another, you risk confusing them and reducing your scene to a hot mess. So, in this scene, we can see that both Jack, his unwilling co-pilot, the bus, and the people on it are all on the freeway. Now, this is an important detail to take note of. The freeway is a design that most, if not all, audience members are familiar with. We, the audience, know the shape of it, how people normally act while on it, and how people are not supposed to act on it. In short, we are very clear on where the action is taking place, and we are very clear on where the characters are in relation to one another. Okay, pause. Now, what do you do if your location is something a little more unfamiliar? If it's a location that most of us don't really know or haven't seen before? Well, you just show it to us. Have your characters walk through it in a scene before the action takes place. Okay, back to Speed. So far, we've established where the action is taking place, the freeway, and we know where the characters are in relation to one another. An added advantage of establishing the basic geography of the scene early is that it actually establishes the location as a problem that needs solving. Jack can't simply walk onto the bus with little effort. The fact that he's on the freeway makes that kinda hard to do. So, he has to overcome the limitations set by the location. He has to overcome the limitations set by the freeway through expressing his character, i.e., courage. Establishing geography early on also means that the audience isn't thrown for a loop when the hero does overcome the boundaries set by the location, in this case, the freeway. If we didn't know where Jack was, where the bus was, and Jack suddenly started climbing the steps of the bus, we wouldn't actually feel anything for him or feel the tension in the scene. Also, we made another video showing how to connect your audience to your characters that we recommend you check out. Rooting interest plays a major role for creating tension, so be sure to learn how to develop that in your characters. Okay, to sum up geography, you must establish the setting first, and you have to pick a location the audience are familiar with. Doing so will make it much easier for your audience to realize what is at stake. In this case, the stakes are life and death, both Jack's and all those people on board the bus. The next element of suspense is focus. We'll be using a later scene in the film for this one. In this scene, our characters are on a subway train. Jack is atop the train, while Annie and the Mad Bomber are inside. The Mad Bomber has Annie, Jack's ass-kicking love interest, with a bomb strapped to her person and the detonator in his hand. Before we go any further, let's address what I mean by focus. That is what I mean by focus. A scene's focus is the item, place, MacGuffin, etc. that the hero will try and possess. It's the visual and physical manifestation of your character's aim or goal. In the earlier scene, Jack's focus was the bus. In this one, it's the detonator. Having a focus in a scene helps the audience understand what your hero is after. In this case, Jack wants the detonator. Why? To save Annie and stop the mad bomber from killing more innocent people. Having a focus also helps us visually gauge if your character is winning or not. Does Jack have the detonator?
No, the bomber is rearranging his face right now, okay?
Cool. So, until Jack gets that detonator, the good guys are in trouble. Okay, so the last element of suspense I want to talk about, and this is possibly the greatest tool any writer can employ, is resistance. By resistance, I mean just that. Things getting in your character's way. But there is a lot more to it than that. There are two ways to inject resistance into a scene. The first is good news, bad news. Good news, bad news is somewhat self-explanatory, but it's much easier to show you than tell you. Good news. Jack finally got the bus driver's attention and told him to. Good news. Jack managed to not get left behind and climb onto the train where Annie had been taken. Bad news.
I gotta get on that bus.
Bad news. The mad bomber has a gun and is shooting at Jack. Good news. Jack figures out a plan to get onto the bus. Good news. Jack, like a boss, manages to dodge the mad bomber's bullets. Bad news. Jack jumps, but half of him is dangling onto the freeway. Bad news. Jack loses his gun. Good news. Jack gets on the bus. Good news. Jack overpowers the bomber. Bad news. Ouch. Good news. Jack sees a solution to his face rearranging problem. And you might have noticed something as I was showing you how good news, bad news worked in both those scenes. The first thing you might have noticed is that the good news, bad news pattern repeated again and again until Jack got to his focus. The second thing you might have noticed is that this pattern can be as long or as short as you need it to be. Jack's attempt to get on the bus didn't have as many good news, bad news couplings as his attempts to finally stop the mad bomber. Meaning, you have to use your creative instincts to figure out the best pattern that will best suit your scene for building suspense. The second tool I want to share with you is the classic ticking clock. Now, don't let the name fool you. Yes, this tool can take the shape of a ticking clock, but it can also manifest in other ways. Let's take a look at another way we can create a ticking clock. In this scene, Jack and Annie are forced to maneuver the bus on a stretch of the freeway that is, unfortunately, unfinished. They incredibly have to jump that gap. This can't be avoided. They can't stop the bus, and they're getting closer and closer to that gap every second. In fact, that sounds a lot like, you guessed it, a ticking clock. So, as you can see, a ticking clock doesn't necessarily have to be a bomb ticking down. It can be any situation where your characters must fight against time and circumstance. So, be creative. You should have either good news, bad news, ticking clock, or both of those techniques in as many scenes as possible. They'll keep your scenes from being a bland back and forth between characters and will keep your audience hooked. As a parting question, can you find any more ticking clocks in Speed? Or do you have any more examples from other films? Feel free to share your answers in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. For those of you that haven't seen Speed, I highly recommend you watch it. It is a masterclass on how to create suspense. Well, that's all I got for you today, gang. Thanks for barely listening.